Welcome to the Crypto on the Block radio show, featuring industry pioneers and CEOs across various industries in blockchain and cryptocurrency. Here's your host, Matthew Loughran.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Crypto on the Block. Again, your host here, Matthew Loughran. Today we have a great show for you. Today we have Anthony Shook, founder and CEO of AeroChain. If you're not familiar with AeroChain, AeroChain is an aviation blockchain solution, helping to not only secure aircraft value through maintenance, recording, and verification, but also unlocking value in the illiquid and disconnected aviation assets and data from aircraft to contracts to human resources and manufacturers. So, Anthony, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. Glad you can join us today. So maybe you can start off by telling us maybe a little bit about yourself and AeroChain itself.
Yeah, so for me, I've been a pilot for going on 12 years now. I have been really lucky to work with great tech people in my career thus far. And while working on a different project and diving deep into blockchain technology as a whole, I really started to make a lot of connections between aviation and the technology of blockchain and how they could work together to create a more efficient aviation market. Aviation is one of those things that's so funny. It's so advanced yet so far behind in its record keeping. And so, I started to dive down, and that's what AeroChain was born out of, was a different project focusing on blockchain technology, and then taking all of my knowledge in aviation and starting to apply the technology to that.
Okay, cool. You said you're a pilot for 16 years. Is that correct?
12 years.
12 years. Okay. Wow. All right. I guess I have a limited knowledge in the aviation field. Can you maybe describe a little bit about that behind the times record keeping?
Yeah. So with aviation, an aircraft is a machine, and it has so many moving parts, all of which are vital for safe flight. And all those parts need tracked. Some parts need tracked more than others. There's a thing called life limited parts, and these parts basically have exactly that, a life limit, right? So either a certain number of hours, a certain number of cycles, which is takeoffs and landings, or a certain number of calendar months, this part must be either replaced or inspected or refurbished, whatever, and then recorded that was actually done. And that comes from both the manufacturer of the aircraft as well as the regulatory body like the FAA. And so because you have all of this record keeping that needs to be done for each individual aircraft, as you can imagine, it becomes kind of a logistical nightmare to make sure that you're complying with not only the regulations and the mandates from the manufacturer, but just making sure that you're having a safe aircraft for people to fly on, right? And then also ensuring that aircraft being maintained to a high standard means that it retains its value. And as many people can imagine, aircrafts are very expensive, regardless of what kind of aircraft it is.
No, they definitely are, actually. I had a friend of mine used to fly F-18s in the military, and then he bought his own small plane in San Diego. And I just remember the price of that and the maintenance when he stopped flying in the military was quite high.
Let me explain a little bit about that. So the maintenance is so high because it's so hard to comply with. And one of the things is okay, so your friend bought this aircraft, and what he had to do is he has to maintain it per regulations. And that means he has to keep a detailed record of everything. And then he has to go to a mechanic or a mechanic shop, an MRO, so they maintenance, repair, overhaul. And what they do is they look through that book, and then they do the service. And so I was talking to a mechanic the other day, and it took him 20 hours to do the work, but 8 hours was just looking for things in the logbook. Literally just going through the maintenance logbook and trying to find pieces. So imagine if you could have taken that mechanic's hourly rate and shaved off 8 hours, right? You would have saved quite a bit of money. And these are just simple things that you're like, wait, so you're telling me that you have to dig through manually to find all this stuff, and that's what's taking so long? And when people start to realize that, it's, they're like, wow, that's so archaic in the way that they run operations for aircraft that are so expensive. It's, like the amount of technology versus the cost of the aircraft, they're opposed to each other, right?
Absolutely. Like, that sounds like a pretty large problem within the industry. So do you think there's is that the kind of the gap in the market that AeroChain is looking to fill, or is it even more than that?
So it's more than that, right? So I think, like with everyone, and when they start a company or an idea, it kind of starts with a seed, right? But you don't really know where that's going to go until you start to dive deeper and deeper. And I of course knew a lot of the problems in the aviation industry that I was actually touching, right? But as I did more and more research, I realized, wow, there's not a single stakeholder within the aviation industry that doesn't need data from another stakeholder. And right now, it's stored in centralized databases that don't talk to each other. Either they don't talk to each other because of the fact that the companies don't want them to talk to each other, or they just haven't thought about it. One thing that I always like to say is most people who get into aviation for a love of aviation and not for a love of like data and record keeping,
Absolutely.
And so as we moved along the track of the life cycle of what AeroChain is, we started to do a lot of research on protocols and what it really means to have a protocol. I think, like a lot of people, we originally thought that a protocol was similar to what we think of a protocol in traditional tech, where it's like a set of standards, right? And we had to really throw that out, because what we started to realize is that is a protocol, but what we're actually building is a fat protocol, which is pretty different, right? And in the fact that it just encompasses so much more. So today, when you think of building an application, you're thinking of using a set of standards to build that application, but the majority of that application sits with you, not inside some protocol. And so the protocol that's fat, you're actually pushing that down into the protocol layer. And so what I think is going to start to happen is you'll actually start to see a lot of different applications starting to be built on top of these protocols, regardless of whether it's aviation or any other industry, because it's going to be so much easier to build an application when you're not doing all of the development and you're just building on what's already been built inside the application, or what's already been built inside the protocol, right? So it just makes it, you can kind of think of it like today, what would take you like 6 devs and quite a bit of time will actually take you 1 dev and a short amount of time to do something very similar. And it will start displacing the monopolies that exist today. Right? So think about it. If there was a protocol in which was like for an Uber, and you could build your own face on top of that, you would essentially be able to be your own little Uber without having to take all of the manpower that it takes to actually create an Uber application and run it, right? So with aviation and with AeroChain, what it's about is it's empowering all the key stakeholders to be able to build on top of a fat protocol in which their data is strong, private. We're really big on privacy and security, and not have to focus as much on like the tech part and building massive applications or software. All the software that exists today is pretty basic and they don't talk to each other. And I think with a lot of enterprise type solutions, you see that a company just is looking for, okay, what is it that I can get for the amount of money I have to do, and how long is it going to take me to implement it, and are people going to use it? And what ends up happening is they're pretty disappointed at the end of the day, because it doesn't do what it needs to do well, right? Like they're focused on, oh, it should do like all of these things. And really the idea is there should be clear, concise way of building applications, which will be guided by AeroChain. But what AeroChain really is a fat protocol that allows for easy build on top of, and there will be interoperability with the current software in order to push and pull data from the protocol itself, which will be really important because just like anything else, when you have the ability to connect data in a meaningful way, you really start to see massive efficiency take hold. And what's really great about, well, I guess it's not great about aviation, but it's great for this is that right now the aviation industry is so inefficient in the fact that a lot of the entered information is either entered manually or it doesn't talk to each other. And so there's several parties that repeat the same thing over and over again. And it's also about the ability to reconcile data pretty much from the get-go, right? A lot of the data that you're trying to use, you have to clean first. But with a protocol and with the way that we're setting this up in the architecture, you have multiple points to verify data, like data points, and it allows for clean, verified data much faster. So that in itself allows for several different stakeholders to pull from that data. For example, right, say that like a manufacturer wants to know, hey, is my part failing before it's supposed to? Who's buying my part? How often is it flying? Which planes is it actually going on? And I can start to forecast demand. I can start to re-engineer my part to have better standards. I can, really figure out who I actually need to focus on as a customer. If it's going on Cessna Citations or it's going on Boeing 737s, but it's not going on anything else, I can then hone in on that. And then on top of that, like think about the Southwest accident, right? With the 737, there's a very limited way in which we can alert people who are actually using parts, right? So you can think of it like when Toyota does a recall, like, oh, hey, your airbag in this model, we need to alert everyone with that airbag that there's a potential flaw. Well, you do the best of your ability, but imagine if you could just send out a ping, right, or an alert, and everyone who's using that specific part on an aircraft would know that it needs to be inspected, right? And that we're experiencing these kind of problems. And, the FAA and it was interested on behalf of the NTSB, right? The National Transportation Safety Board. Because I don't know if anyone's ever followed aircraft accidents, but they're like, hey, this aircraft went down. We'll let you know in 2 years what happened. Because it's like siphoning through records and trying to put all the pieces back together. And it's just hard. It's really hard because there's so many records because the plane has so many moving parts,
Yeah, it sounds pretty interesting. So it sounds like you're kind of reimagining the aviation market through blockchain integration and an ecosystem. It sounds like you're really connecting these different data silos so people can access the information much more readily with a bit more clarity for their own specific goals, like you said, with that manufacturer or maybe from the safety perspective. I know you just started talking about some of it, but what do you think the impact of this could be on the aviation industry itself?
Well, so I think just like anything else, right? There's going to be some changes, and nobody really likes change at first until they start to see positive impact. What I think is going to happen is, there's going to be more efficiency within aviation, and I think that's going to translate into changing of the bottom line. And I really hope that people focus on that. There are some middlemen who are like brokers of aircraft or companies that actually verify that an aircraft is actually as valuable as they say it is, or they go in and audit the records, or all these different things. So there but like some other blockchain projects, like we're going to displace the middleman. And I'm more of the thought that I'm going to empower the honest middleman. I'm going to allow them to do their job much more efficiently and effectively, but it depends where they make their money. If they make their money on inefficiency, it's going to be a little bit harder to survive in the ecosystem. But what's really, really interesting is now that a protocol will exist, all the things that could happen that could never happen before, right? So the ability to streamline aircraft financing, the ability to have up-to-date aircraft valuations. You can create essentially multiple marketplaces from parts to the aircraft itself to, one of the pieces is actually for pilot records, right? Pilots have to keep a logbook mandated by the FAA, but now they can start to keep a logbook that actually they can have verified hours on. So just like when you go and you have an interview with, say, a company, you're saying, oh, look, I went to this university and, I have this job experience, and you call those past employers and stuff. But with pilots, it's more about hours that you've actually flown and ratings that you have from the FAA. Well, the FAA, all that's public, so we can pull that. But the hours are not verified. And it's very, very hard to verify these hours just because it's, if you go through my logbook, I've flown so many different tail numbers of planes. Like, are you going to call every single person? Like, it's very hard. But now if you have the ability, and the same with a mechanic, right? A mechanic works on several different planes. If you have the ability to have these verified that they've worked on it or they've flown this plane or they have that, you now have the ability to look at someone and create a job marketplace where people can be matched up. And then I think we're also moving towards, especially in private aviation, people moving around from one firm to the next, not necessarily always flying the same aircraft or the same, aircraft operator. But if you can verify someone is type rated in that specific aircraft and has open time, and it still meets their hours that they can fly per day, you can start to really match up people. So the insurance, the airworthiness ability to check, the certification process of just aircraft and operators with the FAA that can be streamlined, because all of this will exist in a protocol. Applications can be built on top of it that allow for all these things to happen pretty seamlessly. That today is just a long, drawn-out process. I mean, if you look at how long it took the Boeing 747 to originally get certified compared to what it takes today to get an aircraft certified, the time difference is massive. And it's because it's going back and forth with the regulators all the time, and all of this data that has to go back and forth. Well, imagine if that can all be streamlined. Now you can save money on the certification of new aircraft because you're not spending so much time doing all this admin work, right? So
yeah, it sounds like you've gone through like several different use cases right there for the actual protocol within the industry. So it seems like obviously the protocol, it can be pretty, I say, broad in spectrum, just based on the different touch points that you've mentioned. Can you maybe describe a little bit about the organization? How does it maybe plan to, maybe your revenue model from this industry or the protocol itself? Like, how do you plan on interacting with existing players and so forth?
Yeah. So, the way that we've set it up is that there is a token so that we can have the ability to easily and seamlessly reconcile data, especially like accounts payable, accounts receivable. And right now, data is really hard to get access to in aviation. Because like I said, not only is it centralized, but there's key players who charge a lot of money for data, right? So they either charge it or they pay a lot to buy it. And so our model is specifically you get compensated for the data in which you provide that gets verified, and you pay for data that you pull that you need. So for example, I am an aircraft manufacturer and I want to know, like how my aircraft's actually performing. Or maybe I'm an engine manufacturer and I want to know how the engine's actually performing. And it's no longer, it's not under some kind of aftermarket program that I set up. So I have to figure that out by going door to door, which is kind of funny, but I've actually seen door to door people trying to gather data that is broken and unverified. Well, now if I could just pull that data and pay for it, then I have the ability, and it's already verified, then that allows me to save on all that manpower and that time. But in addition, you can kind of think of it as like music royalties, right? So anytime that someone also pays to query data, it can go back to whoever created that data. So the model is kind of changing, and I always say, like Facebook and Google has so much data on you, but when was the last time they wrote you a check? Yeah,
it really sounds like a debit credit system, and kind of, if that makes total sense, right? So if I'm supplying data, I would get compensated for the use of that data by other third parties, et cetera.
Correct, and there's going to be all kinds of opportunities that arise within that, like the ability to stake tokens on contracts, and the ability to, you could even talk about setting up the back and forth of parts, right? So a lot of the inefficiency that exists is just the tracking of a part from the time that it's, maybe let's say it's a certain kind of part that's actually cut at a tool and die shop, going from there to the time it comes off the aircraft, right? So from the smaller manufacturer to the major aircraft manufacturer to the customer to coming off the aircraft, like that is not tracked today. And you would be able to do that. You might be able to also create all these different, what they call TCRs, where you can start to negotiate fuel prices. And, the idea is, can you really start to also even the playing field a little bit and allow the smaller operators who traditionally are kind of like, hey guys, can I come sit at the table? To be able to, have access to this technology and to be compensated for their data that they generate. It's the same with pilots and mechanics and dispatchers and everybody that creates data that will be queried at some point will be able to be compensated for it.
It sounds like the project definitely fills a lot of gaps within the industry, and honestly, I was never aware, because I'm not in this industry at all. So I think it was kind of eye-opening in the amount of gaps that do exist from a data perspective within aviation. And it sounds like you guys have a good foothold in what you're trying to do, but I'm also curious, kind of maybe what are your company's biggest threats coming into this?
I mean, I think it's just like any other blockchain company, right? I think that if you're really trying to revolutionize an entire industry, it's not going to happen overnight, and it's also not going to be easy. You have a lot of opposing interests. There's the majority of these middlemen make money off of inefficiencies. You also have contracts that exist. You have rivalries. Most people don't maybe know about the rivalries, but there's rivalries between major firms, which is like any other industry. You kind of have your major firms, and they don't like to do a ton of business with each other. And if you get one, you maybe can't get the other. But this isn't really about those major players. What this is about is it's just a better way of doing things. And I think it's kind of with the token and with being able to incentivize strategically, you can start to get rid of the cold start problem, which we're all going to have. And we're also really, really lucky as AeroChain to be focused in an upcoming TV series, a documentary TV series, where we'll talk more and more about this. And we're also hoping that allows us to get on the radar of some of these large players. I think what's going to happen is we're going to start to disrupt using the little guys first, the smaller regional airlines, the private aviation sector. And I think once people start to see the efficiency that's created, it's kind of going to be like either you adapt or, you start to lose your competitive advantage. And it's the same thing with the internet, right? I mean, people were like, I don't know, what? And then you saw more and more and more adoption. And then it was like, either you're on the internet or you don't operate as a business.
Absolutely. I mean, you basically just described the innovator's dilemma specifically, and taking a subsegment of the market, and they're really scaling that to intersect with the mainstream market. So if you're starting on that regional or private level, and eventually you'll get some network effects, and some of the big guys will come calling. Now, you mentioned that in regards to the FAT protocol, is this something you guys are building out homegrown, or is it layered on top of any specific blockchain? Can you share a little bit of insight on the blockchain side of things?
Yeah. So we've done a lot of research, like I think most blockchain firms have done. And what we started to realize was, and also through our television series, we got the core team of Ethereum on it. And what we started to realize is, wow, these people are really, really smart. And Ethereum holds a lot of brain power within the technology. And it'd be really foolish to discount that. And we're also really, really interested in the layers of scalability. I actually wrote a quick article about layers of scalability and kind of broke it down a little bit, which talks about sharding and plasma. And plasma, when Vitalik was talking about it, I think might be one of the solutions to kind of bridge the gap between getting industry on board, right? Industry likes centralized systems. They can kind of control them, i.e. Equifax, Target, Sony, the hacks, but they're less, they feel less comfortable going away from that, right? And so with Plasma, there's a piece of it that is centralized, and it reports back up to the mainnet, right, of Ethereum. So if you kind of dive deep into it, you see that it allows for some of the best parts of blockchain and some of the best parts of a centralized system, especially when it comes to the cost, right? Ethereum is pretty expensive, so how do we get around that and allow our model to be more about the paying for data and less about paying to just record data?
Paying for gas prices.
Yeah. So, I think, I think it's going to be really interesting. And one of the things that we're doing is AeroChain is also developing a application right now for mechanics, pilots, and aircraft maintenance logbooks, in which that will start to play with that inside the protocol. But again, with what a FAT protocol actually is, and it's kind of weird to say FAT protocol because it kind of sounds like you're making a joke, but that's the thing. I know, it was like FAT protocol, but the idea of really being able to make sure that your protocol has everything it needs inside it, and it's like a big undertaking, right? So understanding that and also throwing out the traditional idea of a protocol, and that's why it's so efficient, is because it's taking a lot of these different pieces of technology that have been around for a while and putting them together in a very thoughtful and meaningful way that allows us to actually do all these things, like reconcile data and have all of these pieces inside there. And it's not just a centralized database, because most people are thinking about it right now as like it's just a decentralized, centralized database, and if you use it that way, it's just a very inefficient database, and from a business standpoint, it is not as cost effective.
No, it totally makes sense, and it sounds like the product sounds very interesting. So definitely looking forward, to seeing how it progresses here over the next several months. And then, Anthony, can you let us know what's the best way for our listeners to actually learn more about AeroChain?
Yeah, so our website is aerochain.org, and that's probably the best way to learn about what we're doing. We're on Telegram as well under AeroChain. We're gonna be going to some conferences and doing some stuff, but I think that like everything else, the internet's probably the best way to reach anyone.
So definitely reach out to AeroChain. It sounds like you can pop into their Telegram community then as well and ask some questions, as well as I'm sure they'll keep everyone posted in regards for their calendar of events. And it sounds like a TV series coming out here as well.
Yeah, the TV series, we'll talk more about that when it's publicly announced with one of the partners, and which network it's going on. But I'm really, really excited about it. It's with one of the partners is Stephen David, who did The Men Who Built America, who is a close friend of mine, and I just love that show. I don't know if you've ever watched it, but if you haven't, watch it. It's about like Carnegie and Rockefeller and entrepreneurs who built utility, which I think is what is so interesting, is that's what we're doing today, as we're essentially building protocols that are utilities that people can build on top of, and the mass wealth that was created from that. So it's kind of like the new version of that. So it's gonna be really interesting. And then and we're really lucky. And then also in our Telegram channel, it's mostly aviators and pilots and stuff. So it's pretty cool to see people so excited in aviation, taking pictures from the cockpit and being like, I can't wait to record this flight.
That's cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Anthony, a pleasure having you on the show today. I know you're very busy at this time when you're kind of running a blockchain startup. So I appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to listening to more of your shows.
Absolutely. Okay, everybody. Again, Matthew Loughran. Until next time, talk to you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to the Crypto on the Block radio show with Matthew Loughran. Please subscribe, like, share, and comment. Tune in next time.